It's good to be with you again. It's good to think with you again. Today, I'd like to think with you about lying, deception, self-esteem, self-respect, these concepts which Immanuel Kant, German philosopher, brought together to make one of the most cogent and powerful arguments about lying and by extension, self-respect and morality that I've ever encountered. And I think you'll find it a very unique argument and one worth thinking about, at least in its parts. So Immanuel Kant is one of the most influential thinkers in all of history. He lived from 1724 to 1804. His significance comes from his synthesis of rationalist empiricist mindsets. Rationalism had long held that human knowledge and understanding comes from our innate reason. Empiricism, which is set as the opponent of rationalism, holds that all knowledge and even the entire human intellect is the result of sensory effects caused by our environment. Kant showed how reason and the senses are integrated, but this led to his conclusion that knowledge is not truths about the external universe, but instead descriptions of the inner workings of human consciousness. I think that that's a big topic to take on, and we're not going to do it. But just understanding that one idea, being aware of that one idea, opens up possibilities for self-investigation and self-knowledge in new ways. That's what he did. Kant is a technical writer in High German style. He can be hard to read, but anyone who thinks it through will find that his concepts are precise, his logic is direct, his reasoning is compelling. And even if we don't accept all of his conclusions, I think that we find great value in his method. Kant investigated the inner structure of human consciousness with a logical, analytic approach. He identified the logical preconditions of thought, self-consciousness, freedom, transcendence, and a lot more. Now, he wrote a book called The Doctrine of Virtue. That was one of 3 books that he wrote about moral reasoning, moral philosophy. And in the section of the Doctrine of Virtue that we're looking to, he takes up the topic of lying. And that's the passage, that's the section that we're considering. He starts out that section by pointing out that there are different types of value. And as we go forward, as you listen to this, as you read Kant, because you're going to read him as well, take each sentence by itself, and ask, what is that sentence saying? Because it's by connecting the concepts and the logic of the sentences that he's able to develop his chain of reasoning, which you could go back and forth on and to check. It's very concise and direct way of thinking through problems which, frankly, a lot of people think can't be even talked about, much less solved. And he did it. One type of value, says there's different types of value. So one type of value is conferred to an entity from its external conditions. This he calls extrinsic value. And he points out that this amounts to usefulness. Humans and other animals and other living things and non-living things can have use values such that they are exchangeable for other things of similar value. This exchangeable use value is what makes economies and money possible. We trade one kind of thing for another because the use value of each is separable from the thing. We can even transfer that use value to a symbol, which is what money is. Use value makes things, including humans, interchangeable. The value is not inherent in them. It is dependent upon their usability, which is always relative to a user. Right? So you get a job, and what you're doing is trading your labor, part of yourself, for a pay, which is money. And then you can take that money and go spend it on goods. You're transferring the use value across. And that use value is separating from you. It's separating from the money. It's separating from the things that you buy. It's not, built in to any of them. It's external to them. Now, at this point, you might have an objection that there are things in nature that have more than use value and that they do have intrinsic values. I think it's a really good point, and Kant actually gets to that in his work. But I want to be clear from the onset that Kant is not taking a position where he's negating the possibility of other types of values. He's pointed out two of them, okay? And he's pointed out ways in which objects have, including humans, have use value, but he hasn't said, and other things don't. He does not saying that because a human being has a certain type of value, that other things don't have that value. He is not in this section on lying trying to give a general theory of value. He's out to establish that being human does have intrinsic value, but he does not state that only humans have that value. So your intuition about the possibility of the diversity of values is correct if you're thinking about things other than humans that deserve respect too. Now, in this section, Kant doesn't say anything about that, but if it did turn out that a cat or a tree does have intrinsic value, then he would agree with you that it should be respected. Let's find out why. Now Kant moves to a second type of value, intrinsic value, or inner worth, in his words. That is value in and of itself. It's not dependent on other things or conditions. Unlike use value, inner worth is not exchangeable, and the things that have inner worth are not interchangeable. Now there's a lot of discussion and disagreement in philosophy, also economics and political science, about extrinsic and intrinsic values, that is use value and inner worth. And I think it's good to know about that. But per the principle of charity, we are not running Kant's argument through a gauntlet trying to knock each sentence down along the way. Rather, we're seeking an understanding of his argument, holding evaluation, agreement, or disagreement for later. Neither am I dismissing the objections. I think they're very important. It's just we should know what the argument is and appreciate how it works before we set out trying to demolish it. I'm not going to even try to demolish it. And I'll show this to you by showing how it's worth moving forward, because in the next statement, Kant gives us the heart of his argument about lying, and also about responsibility, by the way. He says, dignity is absolute inner worth by which we extract respect for ourselves. That's a definition. That definition contains a whole lot. He calls the inner worth of a being, its intrinsic value, dignity. And he asserts that the source of respect for oneself, that is self-respect, is based upon inner worth. That statement alone is a platform to meaningful inquiry into yourself, a stepping stone to deep self-knowledge. And I'll point this out to you via questions that Kant doesn't ask, but I believe are implied and raised by his claim. Think about these. Do you know what self-respect is? Or do you draw a blank and have to get that from an external source, such as a dictionary? And if you don't know what self-respect is because somebody else had to tell you, could you actually have it? Do you have respect for yourself? Has that changed over time? Is it possible to gain more self-respect? Is it possible to lose your self-respect? What is your self-respect directed towards? Does your self-respect depend on what other people think or say about you? Does your self-respect depend upon your use values, such as how much money you have, how attractive you are, how much power you have, your ability to fulfill the goals of others? Well, I hope that you see from these questions how in one move, built upon several other statements and definitions, Kant derives the relation of self-respect and inner worth. I'd say that even if someone does knock down his prior statements, the topic of self-respect remains relevant and open to personal inquiry. Whether you buy that or not, let's continue on to see where this logically leads. Having logically connected self-respect to inner worth, Kant also connects the concept of self-esteem to duty. Later, he uses the word obligation as synonymous with duty. I'll take a variation and express this concept of responsibility, as in, you have a responsibility to yourself. That responsibility to oneself cannot be based on an extrinsic use value. If it exists, it cannot be external to us. In terms of the distinction of the two types of value, responsibility must be in reference to one's own inner worth. Kant emphasizes this by pointing out a phrase that we use in ordinary life. At least I'm pretty sure you've heard it. I owe it to myself. See if you can finish this sentence. I owe it to myself to ... in a way that is true about you. Yourself. Do you feel responsible to yourself and for yourself? What if you were to believe that you have zero responsibility to yourself and that you owe nothing to yourself? What would your life be like then? Kant implies that a person who has no responsibilities to themselves also has no self-esteem. But esteem is the recognition of value, and self-esteem is the recognition of your own value. So it follows that the absence of responsibility to oneself and self-esteem implies the absence of self-respect, which is the denial of one's own self-worth. Kant goes further, connecting responsibility to oneself to responsibility to others. When he wrote about dignity, he said that every human being has inner worth or dignity. And it's that inner worth that we esteem when we show them respect. Conversely, when a person is disrespected in a sense being considered, it's their inner worth that's being ignored or denied. We can have responsibilities that we don't uphold, including to ourselves. The key point of this passage is that to esteem and uphold the inner worth of others is also to uphold a responsibility to ourselves. Because respecting the inner worth of others means that you are respecting the esteem of inner worth in general, which includes your own. Inner worth is not conditional. It is not a use value. We cannot take it away from others and trade it for something else. Though we can ignore it and deny it, but that does not remove the inner worth. So by respecting the inner worth of others, we are respecting inner worth in general, thereby respecting our own as well. Our responsibility to the dignity of human beings in general posits that which we share with them. Moreover, you have the right to the respect of others in regard to your own inner worth, whether they honor it or not, because you esteem your own inner worth. Deny your inner worth and you leave no basis to expect extrinsic respect from anyone else. I hope that you sense at this point how unique Kant's reasoning is. He draws his arguments and inferences from the internality and subjectivity of the individual person. By analyzing the components of our conscious inner world and showing their relations, he draws inferences about value. He's not relying on psychology or physiology or sociology. He is developing a metaphysics of subjectivity, of the inner life of the individual and others. He set the foundations for self-respect and self-responsibility. Kant moves to lying. He notes that typically people have thought of the morality of lying, whether they denounce it or defend it, as having to do with the responsibilities to others. It's common to rate the severity of lies from little to big, a big lie being one that harms others, a little lie causes little harm or no harm and may even benefit a person. Kant does not buy into this value scale because that is only about the use value of a lie. It's extrinsic value. He's out to direct us to the intrinsic value of lying. That is, what does a lie that you tell reveal about your self-esteem and self-respect? We can see the intrinsic value of lying by focusing on the inner lie, in Kant's words, which is the type of lie that we tell to ourselves. It is lying to ourselves, self-deception. Within this focus, the harm to others is not relevant to the value of such a lie. I suppose that you know what lying to yourself is. Although if you're very good at it, you've already hidden it from yourself. A lie within a lie. At least you've detected it in other people and you know what that's like. I'll give you an example from my own experience. It has to do with addiction. I had a relative who was a lifelong chain smoker. Even as she would light the next cigarette from the last, she would often assert, "I'm not addicted, you know, I can quit whenever I want." She'd say that even when I didn't ask, and I suspect she was really saying it to herself. Only once did I point out that the addiction works by changing your wants and desires. She's defending a version of addiction that takes away choice. By saying that she could quit whenever she wanted to, she was saying she still had her freedom of choice and so was not really addicted. I pointed out that, of course, if she really wanted to, she could quit, but that the nicotine had manipulated her wants, rendering her physiology and psychology such that she did not want to quit. That's what addiction actually is. Of course, my mini lecture had no effect, and she merely repeated even more often and vigorously, "I could quit if I wanted to. I'd just say stop smoking and my incredible willpower would make it happen." Well, that never happened over 88 years. And I believe that this instance shows a kind of self-deception. Suppose she had said instead, "I know I'm addicted. I can't quit because I don't want to, and I don't care." Well, I'd say that's not self-deception. The kind of lying to oneself in this example may be analyzed through the defense mechanisms of denial and rationalization, which I think is what we're seeing here. You can see Anna Freud for that. Now, Kant raises a philosophical issue about consciousness, in which self-deception seems to be a contradictory idea. How can we deceive ourselves when we are also the ones doing the deceiving? Can we know the truth and not know the truth at the same time? Now, this is an important idea, an issue that was prominent in 20th century philosophy. And I think it's worth noting that Kant doesn't avoid objections to his thinking. He picks them up and looks at them. This is a possible one. Okay? What I'll take from it here is the concept of self-contradiction. To some theorists, the idea that self-deception is contradictory means that it can't exist. I think, rather, that the logic points to what happens when a self-contradiction, what I call an inner contradiction, occurs within a person. I've written about this in other works, such as on defense mechanisms, and the point that I emphasize is how the occurrence or even threat of an inner contradiction is so impactful on a person's psychological system that the system works to avoid it at great cost. That's how defense mechanisms arise. For our present investigation into lying, it is meaningful to keep this concept of inner contradiction, where one aspect of our mind or life conflicts with another part of our mind or life. I've written of psychological defense mechanisms as directed to prevent inner contradictions. Kant observes that all lies contain contradictions, at least between what the liar says and believes. As I see it, the problem of lying to oneself, self-deception, is that the contradiction is internalized. It becomes an inner contradiction that our psychological system may only adapt to by creating new defensive deceptions. This happens over time as we lie and lie and lie again until lying becomes a dominant feature of our character and we become strangers to ourselves. Okay, so I'm aware that a lot of concepts, arguments, and examples are happening here. So let's recap before we go on to Kant's next step. Kant has distinguished use value from inner worth. He has argued that our own esteem of our inner worth is the basis for self-respect. He has argued that our responsibilities to ourselves is based in our self-respect. It says that the moral value of lying is most importantly how it impacts our own self-respect and self-esteem. Most clearly and significantly so in the lies that we tell to ourselves, our self-deception. Each of these claims and logical inferences can be objected to and debated, but they can also be apprehended and appreciated in their own right, which is what I'm asking you to do now. Because now Kant brings the entire chain of reasoning to its logical conclusion. And here it is. He says, by a lie, a person throws away and, as it were, annihilates their dignity as a person. Remember that dignity is inner worth. He's claiming that when we lie, we are denying our own inner worth. In a lie, we are negating our own self-respect. In a lie, we are abandoning our own self-esteem. That, for Kant, is the basis of the moral significance of lying. Throws away and annihilates, as it were. Kant is not saying that the liar loses their basis for respect from others. We cannot remove our inner worth, but we can reject and ignore our own inner worth, which is a negative act of self-disesteem, anti-self-esteem, the opposite of self-esteem. It's what we create. Is this really possible just by lying? Well, I ask you, are you aware of the phenomena of self-loathing, not trusting oneself, not believing in oneself, self-denial, self-anger, self-hatred, self-harm? I think those exist in various degrees for many people. Well, those are opposites of the self-respect and self-esteem that Kant extols. How is it possible for someone to so lose their sense of self? Kant's answer is that by treating oneself as an object without inner worth, we lead to the loss of self-esteem, which is recognizing our own inner worth, and that merits consideration. Kant explains that in any lie that you make, you are negating and rejecting one of the attributes that gives you inner worth, the ability to think and to communicate your thoughts. He says, the person who communicates their thoughts to someone in words, which yet intentionally contain the contrary of what they think on the subject, is purposely and directly opposed to the natural purposiveness of the power of communicating one's thoughts, and therefore renounces his personality and makes themselves a mere deceptive appearance of a person, not a person themselves. It's a pretty heavy and idea-packed statement. Yet given that you're paying attention with an open mind, I'll bet that its main idea makes some sense to you now. Rather than try to unpack it systematically here, I'll ask you to read it and think it through 3 or 4 times by itself. Break it down into parts and track it back to how those parts came together out of the whole argument. I'll add here what I think is the logical consequence of this passage. In order to successfully lie to another person, you have to gain their trust. They have to believe that you believe what you are telling them. If they do not trust your word, then the lie is still a lie, it just doesn't work. Either way, you've made yourself untrustworthy. You've produced an image of yourself that appears to be worthy of trust, worthy of respect, and consistent in character, whereas in the reality that you keep hidden is that you are being deliberately unworthy of trust, unworthy of respect, and internally inconsistent. It is, as Kant says, you've presented yourself as a deceptive appearance of yourself. That deceptive appearance does not have inner worth. It's a fraud. It's not a real person. It's not you. Therefore, in the act of any lie, you are negating your inner worth, which is the same as the absence of self-esteem, and thereby relinquishing your self-respect. It's not that the other person or their views which does this to you, it's you doing it to yourself. And that's why Kant speaks of the annihilation, as it were, of inner worth. Through lying, any lie, your inner worth doesn't go away, but from your point of view, it's absent. And if you do not recognize your own inner worth, no self-respect is possible. Only a fake and deceptive counterfeit of it, which he calls a deceptive appearance of a person, the deceptive appearance of yourself. That deceptive appearance does not have inner worth. It's a fraud. It's not a person. It's not a real person. Therefore, in the act of any lie, you are negating your inner worth, which is the same as the absence of self-esteem, thereby relinquishing your self-respect. You have recast yourself for yourself as a deceptive appearance of yourself. The lie goes deep, much deeper than we realize. It is not the other person or their views that does this to you. It's you doing it to yourself. That's why Kant speaks of annihilation, as it were, of inner worth. Through lying, any lie, your inner worth does not go away, but from your point of view, it's absent in the moment. And if you do not recognize your own inner worth, no self-respect is possible, only a fake and deceptive counterfeit out of it, the deceptive appearance of a person, the deceptive appearance of yourself. That's what you've traded it for. Kant expands on this reasoning. A person, as a moral being, cannot use their natural being as a mere means, a speaking machine, as if it were not bound to its intrinsic end, the communication of thought. We are bound to use our natural being in a way that is consistent with the pronouncement, declaration of our moral being, and obligated to ourselves to truthfulness. I think he is essentially saying that through lying, and let's focus on lying to yourself here, we are rejecting our own inner worth and replacing it for a use value, an extrinsic value. After all, the normal defense for lying is that it was useful, a means to get what we wanted. This is also so with self-deception. We lie to ourselves in order to avoid psychological pain. That is the use basis of defense mechanisms. The point I want to emphasize is that people typically think of morality as obligations and limits put on us from other people or society. Kant is seeking out the basis of a personal morality that derives from your individual inner worth. Moral value comes from you and is about you. If you follow the logical implications of that source, you find that living coherently and consistently with yourself is both a subjective and objective guide to moral value. Now, I'm not out to moralize and judge your life, yet I want to leave you with this. It is true that lying can be useful. It is true that our defense mechanisms, our methods of our psychological systems, used to spare us from pain, anxiety, and mental breakdown. These have uses. They cannot be summarily faulted for what they are designed to do. They do have a value. Yet, consider what kind of person you would become if you had no need for defense mechanisms and no need for lies. What if your personality could face reality head on without denial or deception? You become if the truths to which you hold were always present in the words that you spoke. That you accepted the truth of yourself, hid nothing, and accepted no guilt or shame for being as you are, whatever consequences. Consider what life you would lead if you took total responsibility for and to yourself. Imagine that version of yourself, because it is possible. Suppose that your self-esteem was strong. Suppose that your self-respect was unbreakable. Suppose that you lived on the outside in a way fully consistent with that version of yourself on the inside. Kant gives us the logical basis of the practicality for that ideal for each of us. Kant never says that we're unable to regain our self-esteem or to rebuild our self-respect. If that is possible, what is it worth to you? Whatever else you make of all of this, it's worth being aware of and thinking about, and I leave that to you now. Thanks for listening. I believe in you. Good Spirit, John.
Thank you.